Let's travel back in time. The year is 1971. The air smells of leaded gasoline and questionable fashion choices. Ford Motor Company, a titan of American industry, unleashes a new car upon the world, the Ford Pinto. It was small, it was cheap, and it was, shall we say, a bit of a death trap. You see, the Pinto had a tiny, minuscule design flaw. Its fuel tank was located right behind the rear axle, a place so vulnerable that a gentle tap from another car in traffic could turn it into a rolling barbecue. This wasn't just a minor oversight, it was a catastrophic engineering failure waiting for a fender bender. And oh boy, did it find them. The stories were horrific, leading to hundreds of burn deaths and injuries. Now, here's where the story gets truly astonishingly cynical. Did Ford not know? Oh, they knew. They knew all about it. Before the car even hit the showrooms, their own engineers had flagged the issue. But then, the accountants got involved. Yes, the accountants. They sat down with their little calculators and produced a now infamous internal memo. In this document, they calculated the cost of fixing the fuel tank, about $11 per car, versus the cost of paying out potential lawsuits for people who would inevitably be burned alive. Their cold, hard calculation? It was cheaper to let people die. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a story about risk management, or more accurately, a story about what happens when risk management is done by people who appear to have misplaced their souls. Ford didn't ignore the risk, they quantified it. They looked a clear and present danger right in the eye and decided that the financial cost of human life was a price they were willing to pay. They gambled that the fallout, the lawsuits, the public relations nightmare would be less damaging than a recall and a simple fix. It was a calculated risk that ultimately blew up in their face, both literally for Pinto owners and metaphorically for the company's reputation, which took decades to recover. All right, let's break this down. Risk at its core is simply the possibility that something bad might happen. That's it. It's the chance that your brilliant new business idea, cat cafes on cruise ships, might sink. It's the possibility that the avocado you bought will go from rock hard to brown mush in the span of 30 minutes, completely bypassing the perfectly ripe stage. Risk is the uncertainty that hangs over every decision we make, from crossing the street to investing our life savings. It's the gap between the future we want and the many other, less pleasant futures that could unfold instead. It's the universe's way of keeping us on our toes. So if risk is the potential for things to go sideways, risk management is the process of trying to stop that from happening. Or, if it does happen, making sure it's just a small, manageable sideways hop instead of a full-blown, catastrophic tumble down a mountainside. It's not about avoiding risk entirely. That's impossible unless you plan to spend your life sealed in a climate-controlled bubble. And even then, what about mold? No, it's about being smart. It's about identifying what could go wrong, figuring out how likely it is to go wrong, and then deciding what, if anything, you're going to do about it. Think of it as being the responsible adult in the room of your own life. Now, you might be thinking, this sounds terribly boring. This sounds like homework. And you're not wrong. It can sound that way. But ignoring it is like deciding not to look both ways before crossing a busy highway because it's inconvenient. The consequences matter. For a business, poor risk management can lead to bankruptcy, lawsuits, or becoming a cautionary tale like the Ford Pinto. In your personal life, it can mean financial ruin, health problems, or that sinking feeling when you realize you backed up your photos to a hard drive that you then used as a coaster for a leaky mug of coffee. The beautiful thing about risk management is that it's a universal skill. It's not just for CEOs in shiny suits, it's for everyone. It is the fundamental practice of thinking ahead, of asking what if, and having a sensible answer ready. It's the art of not letting the future catch you completely by surprise, because the future, as we all know, is a relentless and often mischievous jerk. Let's talk about Domino's, not the pizza, which carries its own set of risks, mainly to your dignity and your digestive system. I'm talking about the little rectangular tiles. You line them up, you tap the first one, and they all fall down in a satisfying cascade. This is a perfect metaphor for how unmanaged risks work. Often, a major disaster isn't the result of one single giant failure. It's a chain reaction, A series of small, seemingly insignificant problems that are allowed to line up, one after the other, until a gentle nudge sends the whole system crashing down. Each one on its own seems manageable, but together they create an unstoppable force of failure. Consider the 2008 financial crisis. You can't point to one single person or event and say, "There, that's the culprit." It was a domino cascade of epic proportions. Domino 1 banks started giving out risky subprime mortgages to people who couldn't possibly afford them. Domino 2, they bundled these risky loans together into complicated financial products that almost no one understood. Domino 3 rating agencies, the supposed watchdogs, stamped these toxic bundles with a AAA rating, basically saying, "This pile of garbage is as safe as gold." Domino 4. Everyone, from giant investment banks to your grandma's pension fund, bought them. When the first domino, the homeowners, started to default, the whole chain collapsed, taking the global economy with it. This isn't just a financial phenomenon, it happens in engineering too. The tragic explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986 was a textbook example. The technical cause was the failure of a tiny rubber O-ring in one of the solid rocket boosters. Just a little rubber ring. But that was the last domino. The ones before it were a series of ignored warnings from engineers, pressure to launch despite dangerously cold temperatures, and a culture of go fever at NASA that pushed aside safety concerns. Each decision, each ignored warning, was a domino set in place, waiting for the cold weather to provide the final tap. The lesson here is profound and a little bit scary. Small risks have a tendency to multiply. Ignoring a little bit of rust on your car's frame might seem fine, until one day the whole thing splits in two. Putting off a software update seems harmless, until a hacker exploits that exact vulnerability and steals all your data. The domino effect teaches us that risk management requires vigilance. It means paying attention to the small stuff, because the small stuff is what the big stuff is made of. You have to be willing to stop the line and pull out a wobbly domino before the entire elaborate construction comes crashing down on your head. Ah, the Titanic, the ship of dreams, the unsinkable vessel. Except, as we all know, it was spectacularly sinkable. The story of the Titanic is more than just a tragic romance involving a suspiciously large blue diamond. It is perhaps the most famous and cinematic example of catastrophic risk management failure in modern history. It's a gold-plated, iceberg-sized monument to human arrogance and the folly of ignoring clear and present dangers. The builders, the owners, and the captain weren't just unlucky. They were actively, almost willfully negligent in how they assessed and prepared for the risks of sailing the North Atlantic. Let's start with the design. It was called unsinkable because it had 16 watertight compartments that could be sealed off. The thinking was that even if a few flooded, the ship would stay afloat. The risk? The walls separating these compartments didn't go all the way up to the main deck. It was like building a series of ice cube trays. If you tilt it too far, the water just spills over from one section to the next. This was a known design flaw, a calculated risk that traded absolute safety for, well, probably saving a bit of money on steel. A single, long gash from an iceberg was the one scenario this design couldn't handle, and it's exactly what happened. Then there's the operational side of things, which was a comedy of errors if the punchline wasn't the deaths of over 1,500 people. First, the ship was racing to set a transatlantic speed record, which is a bit like trying to set a land speed record in a school zone. This meant ignoring multiple repeated ice warnings from other ships in the area. The radio operator was reportedly so overwhelmed with sending personal messages for the wealthy passengers that he dismissed a crucial final warning. Furthermore, the lookouts in the crow's nest didn't have binoculars. They were apparently locked in a cabinet and the key was left on shore. They were trying to spot city-sized blocks of ice in the dark with the naked eye. And finally, the most infamous failure: the lifeboats. The Titanic was legally required to carry enough lifeboats for about 1,178 people, which it did. The problem? There were over 2,200 people on board. The regulations were hopelessly outdated, written for much smaller ships, and no one thought to update them for this new class of giant liner. Worse still, The crew was so poorly drilled that they launched the first boats half empty, fearing the davits couldn't hold the weight of a full boat. From its very conception to its final moments, the Titanic was a floating checklist of unmanaged risks, a perfect storm of hubris, corner cutting, and a complete failure to ask, what's the worst that could happen, and are we ready for it? Okay, so we've talked about exploding cars, financial meltdowns, and sinking ships. It's all very dramatic, very high stakes, but it's easy to listen to these stories and think, well, I don't run a car company or captain a transatlantic liner, so what does this have to do with me? And the answer is everything. Risk management isn't a luxury reserved for multinational corporations or government agencies. It is a fundamental life skill that applies to every single one of us, every single day. The principles are exactly the same whether you're managing a $100 billion portfolio or just trying to get through the week without a major calamity. Think about your personal finances. What's the risk? The risk is a sudden, unexpected expense. Your car breaks down, your boiler gives up the ghost, or you get hit with a surprise medical bill. Ignoring this risk is what leads people into crippling debt. What's the risk management strategy? It's creating an emergency fund. It's putting aside a little bit of money each month into a separate account that you don't touch. That fund is your lifeboat. It's the thing that turns a potential catastrophe, I have to go into debt to fix my car, into a manageable inconvenience. Well, this is annoying, but I'm prepared for it. Let's talk about your career. Maybe you're a freelancer. The biggest risk is an unreliable income stream. A big client leaves, or a project gets canceled. The risk management here is diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Cultivate multiple clients, even small ones. Develop a new skill on the side. Build a professional network so that if one door closes, you have 5 other doors you can knock on. If you work a traditional job, the risk is that your skills become obsolete or your company downsizes. The management strategy is continuous learning, keeping your resume updated, and staying aware of your industry's trends. It's about making yourself fireproof. Even your health involves constant risk management. The risk is illness or injury. The management strategies are both simple and complex. On a basic level, it's eating reasonably well, getting some exercise, and not taking up base jumping as a weekend hobby. It's getting regular checkups. On a more formal level, it's having health insurance. That insurance policy is a classic risk management tool. You pay a small, predictable amount, the premium, to protect yourself from a potentially huge, unpredictable cost. In every corner of our lives, we are constantly, whether we realize it or not, making choices that either increase or mitigate risk. The trick is to start doing it consciously. So, how do you actually do this? How do you go from vaguely worrying about things to actively managing risk like a pro? It's simpler than you think. It boils down to a 4-step process that you can apply to almost any situation, from planning a vacation to starting a business. Step 1 is identify the risks. This is the brainstorming phase. Get a piece of paper or open a document and just list everything that could possibly go wrong. Don't filter yourself. Be paranoid. If you're planning a wedding, what are the risks? The photographer could get sick, it could rain, the caterer could deliver chicken instead of fish, Uncle Barry could give an inappropriate speech. Write it all down. Step 2, analyze the risks. Now you look at your big, scary list and you ask 2 questions for each item. First, what is the likelihood of this happening? Is it very likely, somewhat likely, or about as likely as a squirrel winning the lottery? Second, what is the impact if it does happen? Would it be a minor annoyance, a major problem, or a total disaster? A typo in the wedding invitation is a low-impact risk. The venue burning down is a high-impact risk. This step helps you separate the genuine threats from the minor worries. You can't fix everything, so you need to focus on the things that are both likely and damaging. Step 3. Treat the risks. This is where you decide what to do. You generally have 4 options. First, you can avoid the risk. If you're worried about Uncle Barry's speech, you can simply not ask him to give one. Problem solved. Second, you can mitigate the risk, which means making it less likely or less damaging. You can't stop it from raining, but you can rent a tent to mitigate the impact. You can hire a reputable photographer who has a backup plan in their contract. Third, you can transfer the risk. This is what insurance is. You transfer the financial risk of the venue burning down to an insurance company. Finally, you can accept the risk. For small stuff with low impact, you might just decide to live with it. Step 4, and this is the one everyone forgets: monitor and review. The world changes. New risks pop up, and old ones fade away. Your plan from 6 months ago might not be relevant today. You have to periodically look at your plan and ask, is this still working? Has anything changed? Maybe a new risk has emerged. For instance, a new airline strike is threatening your honeymoon plans. Good risk management isn't a one-time task. It's an ongoing cycle. It's a habit of thinking, a continuous process of looking ahead, preparing for trouble, and adjusting your course as you go. It's the most practical superpower you can possibly develop. Let's journey back to the year 2000. It was a simpler time. The internet made dial-up noises, and the height of Friday night entertainment was wandering the aisles of a Blockbuster video store, arguing with your family over which VHS tape to rent, and stocking up on overpriced candy. Blockbuster was a giant, an undisputed king with 9,000 stores, and a seemingly unshakable business model. In that same year, a tiny struggling startup called Netflix, which mailed DVDs in little red envelopes, offered to sell itself to Blockbuster for a mere $50 million. The CEO of Blockbuster basically laughed them out of the room. He saw Netflix not as a threat, but as a very small niche business. This was a colossal failure of risk management. The leadership at Blockbuster failed to identify the single biggest risk to their entire existence: technological change. They saw their business as renting physical things from physical stores. They didn't see that their actual business was content delivery. They were so focused on the risk of late fees and scratched DVDs that they completely missed the existential threat of the internet and digital streaming. They saw the future coming, offered to them on a silver platter for a bargain price, and they arrogantly turned it down. We all know how that story ended. Blockbuster went bankrupt, and its last remaining store is now a quirky tourist attraction. Now let's look at Netflix. Their entire history is a masterclass in brilliant risk management. First, they took a risk on the DVD by mail model, correctly identifying that people hated late fees more than they loved browsing in a store. Then, as their business grew, they did something incredible. They decided to actively destroy their own successful business model. They saw that streaming was the future, even when the technology was clunky and internet speeds were slow. They knew that their profitable DVD business was on borrowed time. So they took a massive gamble and poured billions into developing a streaming platform, cannibalizing their own cash cow in the process. This is the highest form of risk management, anticipating future threats and proactively pivoting, even when it's painful. Netflix didn't wait for the risk to materialize. They managed it years in advance. And they didn't stop there. They identified the next risk, being beholden to movie studios for content. So what did they do? They took another monumental risk and started producing their own original shows and movies, like House of Cards. It was another bet the company move. The contrast couldn't be clearer. Blockbuster ignored risk and died. Netflix embraced calculated risk as a tool for survival and growth, and in doing so, it completely changed how the entire world consumes entertainment. If risk management is so important and the steps are so logical, why are we as humans often so terrible at it? Why do we smoke cigarettes but worry about shark attacks? Why do we text while driving but panic about airplane turbulence? The answer lies in our brains, which are, to be blunt, buggy, outdated pieces of hardware. We are running ancient software designed for surviving on the savannah, not for navigating the complexities of modern life. Our instincts and biases constantly trip us up, making us overestimate some risks and completely ignore others that are far more dangerous. One of the biggest culprits is something psychologists call availability heuristic. This is a fancy term for a simple idea. If we can easily recall examples of something, we think it's more common and more likely to happen. The news is filled with dramatic, scary stories about plane crashes, terrorist attacks, and child abductions. Because these stories are so vivid and memorable, our brains flag them as major threats. Meanwhile, Boring silent killers like heart disease or car accidents, which are statistically thousands of times more likely to harm us, don't get the same mental airtime. We fear the spectacular, not the probable. Then there's optimism bias, the little voice in our heads that whispers, "That won't happen to me." It's the belief that we are less likely to experience a negative event than others. This is why people don't wear helmets, don't save for retirement, and start businesses with no plan. It's a useful bias for getting out of bed in the morning, but it's a disaster for long-term planning. It convinces us that the rules of probability apply to everyone else. We see the statistics, we hear the warnings, but on a gut level we feel personally immune. It's the "it's different when it's me" fallacy. Finally, we are wired for short-term gratification. Our brains prefer a small, certain reward now over a large, uncertain reward later. This is why dieting is so hard. The pleasure of a donut right now is tangible and immediate, while the benefit of not eating it, better health in the distant future, is abstract and far away. The same goes for risk. Avoiding a risk often means accepting a small definite cost or inconvenience now, like the hassle of putting money into a savings account, to prevent a large potential cost later. Our impatient primitive brain struggles with that trade-off. Understanding these mental bugs is the first step to overriding them and making smarter, more rational decisions. So after all this talk of disaster, failure, and our faulty brains, it would be easy to feel a bit hopeless. To see risk management as a grim, defensive chore, a list of all the ways the universe is trying to ruin your day. But that's the wrong way to look at it. That's like saying the brakes on your car are just there to stop you from having fun. No, the brakes are what allow you to go fast. They give you the control and confidence to navigate corners and handle speed, knowing you can stop safely when you need to. And that is exactly what risk management is. It's not a wet blanket, it's a secret weapon. Properly managing risk doesn't mean you stop taking risks. In fact, it's the complete opposite. It empowers you to take bigger, smarter risks. The person with a 6-month emergency fund is the one who can confidently quit a toxic job to start their own business. The company that has a solid plan for supply chain disruptions is the one that can expand into new, volatile markets. Managing the downside frees you up to focus on the upside. It clears away the paralyzing fear of what if and replaces it with the strategic confidence of even if. It turns a gamble into a calculated move. Think of it as the foundation of a building. No one gets excited about pouring concrete and laying rebar. It's the boring, invisible part of the structure. But without that strong foundation, you could never build a soaring, magnificent skyscraper. Risk management is that foundation for your life, your career, and your business. It's the unglamorous work that makes all the exciting, ambitious, and wonderful things possible. It provides the stability you need to reach for the sky without worrying that the whole structure will collapse at the first sign of a strong wind. Ultimately, embracing risk management is an act of profound optimism. It's the belief that you can shape your future, that you are not just a passive victim of circumstance. It's about taking control of your own story. It allows you to move through the world with less anxiety and more intention, prepared for the worst, but free to pursue the best. It's the difference between being a passenger, tossed about by the whims of fate, and being the pilot, with your hands firmly on the controls, navigating through turbulence toward your chosen destination. And in a world filled with uncertainty, that control is the most valuable asset you can possibly have.